Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today, the topic of our show is why is Russia back in Afghanistan? To discuss this topic, we have with us today a political scientist, a professor, and also a philosopher, Dr. Rakisits. Dr. Rakisits was also an advisor to the Australian Shadow Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs and also the advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. Welcome to our show, Dr. Rakisits. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to our conversation.
Dr. Rakisits, let's get to the first question. After Syria and Ukraine, do you think that Afghanistan is becoming the next hotspot for U.S.-Russian conflict?
I think it's quite possible that it could go in that direction. But having said that, I don't think it will go to the same extent as the competition is now really hot in Syria, and to a lesser extent in Ukraine. I'll explain why. Syria is very close to Europe. In Syria, there's a port of Tartu, which is, of course, Russia's last and actually an only toehold that it still has in the Mediterranean, which is very different from the days of the USSR when it had so many friends around the neighborhood. So that's why the Russians moved in militarily into Syria, something that, of course, it hasn't done in Afghanistan. It's across the border, but it's not in Afghanistan like, of course, it is in Syria. And, of course, at the same time, we have Ukraine, which is, of course, in Europe, and so Russia has a lot at stake there as well. Having said that, NATO and certainly the United States is not going to go to war over Ukraine or even Crimea for that matter. Crimea is pretty much Russian for forever now. And so that's very, very different. So those two those two theaters of operations, Syria and Ukraine, they're still going to be going on for quite a while. And certainly Afghanistan is not going to be on par or as hot, if you want to use that term, as hot between the US and Russia as Syria and Ukraine.
Let's get to the second question. 3 decades after a military defeat of the Soviets, Russia seems to be active again against the United States in numerous global hotspots, as mentioned in my earlier question. How are circumstances any different from then and now, and how are they similar? Does Russia have more allies in the region?
Well, the big difference is, of course, from 30 years ago as opposed to now, is, of course, the USSR in those days, as it was called, had very few friends. Probably the only friend it had in the region, in the South Asia, Central Asia region, was, of course, India, which, of course, completely agreed with the USSR's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. But the big difference, of course, from then and now is the fact that now Russia has as friends and allies Iran, mainly due to various strategic reasons, including, of course, a nuclear deal, which Russia signed off on as well. So that's a big change to have Iran on its side. And, of course, it's deepening its relationship with Pakistan as well. And, of course, the big difference is, of course, in Iran and at least until 1979, and Pakistan were, of course, very much in the U.S. camp. That all changed after 79 with Iran and the Iranian Revolution. Those are the very big differences with regard to two key countries that are now feeling much more comfortable with Russia. And, of course, India has very good relations back in the days in 79 with the USSR, but also has good relations with Russia as well, although it's probably not that happy to see Russia more involved in Afghanistan.
Dr. Rakisits, Russia perceives ISIS as a global threat and suggests talks with the Taliban because the Taliban's policy, according to their opinion, is only limited to Afghanistan. Do you agree with the Russian claim?
Well, they're probably all right to a certain extent only. ISIS is a global threat, as we've seen, and although their territory has pretty much gone now in Syria and Iraq, the threat hasn't gone. We know that. Now, whether or not the Taliban only has target basically is only interested in Afghanistan, that's a moot point, and it's difficult to tell. Certainly at this point, the Taliban's major objective is, of course, to take over power back again in Kabul. What it does with it afterwards is another issue. We don't know what will happen. Will it be in a coalition? And also we don't know how it would behave towards the region and beyond. But I do think that a Taliban victory in Kabul would actually be bad news for the region, and particularly for Pakistan, because it would give a real fillip to the TTP back in Pakistan in seeing that their fellow ideological travelers, if I may call them that, have won next door and would probably be supportive of the TTP's cause in Pakistan. So this is not, it wouldn't be very good news at all.
Numerous reports by the CNN and Times of London suggest that Russia might be arming the Taliban against NATO forces and ISIS in Afghanistan. Do you agree with those reports, and how does this affect the geopolitics of the region?
Well, obviously I can't personally, confirm or deny these reports, whether or not they're correct or not. But I suspect they are correct. There are numerous public sources, including by hearings in Congress, by the U.S. military and the commanders in Afghanistan, confirming that yes, the Russians are arming the Taliban, and so I suspect this is all true. I believe the Russians arming the Taliban is bad news all around. First of all, it empowers the Taliban, and it helps them in their ultimate goal, which is to defeat the Afghan government. And as I mentioned before, a Taliban win in Kabul would not be good news for the region, particularly for Pakistan, given its audience. The other thing that is not good is also with Russia arming the Taliban, it also creates tension with China to have the Russians arming the Taliban. Because don't forget, is that the Chinese are very much worried about the Uyghurs. Some of them are hiding in Afghanistan. And certainly one thing that China doesn't want to have to deal with is, wants to snuff out, is of course the whole East Turkestan independence movement in Western China. And so by helping the Taliban, this again gives a fillip as well to the Uyghurs, and who may also have ideas of wanting to have some sort of also Islamic revolution, perhaps in Western China.
Dr. Rakisits, let's get to a very important question. Russia is reclaiming its influence in the region. One of its examples is the talks in Moscow in December 2016 with both Pakistan and China discussing a regional solution to Afghanistan. Do you think this is due to a flawed U.S. policy on Afghanistan? And do you also think that the U.S. South Asian policy is flawed? If yes, how can it improve?
Okay. First of all, Russia obviously wants to take advantage of the vacuum that's been created with the evacuation, the departure of NATO and the U.S. troops from Afghanistan. I mean, they're still there, but in much reduced numbers, and what they need to do there is very different from what they were doing before. They were in combat operations before, and now, of course, they're only there to train and mentor the Afghan troops. So that's very different. And of course, Russia wants to take advantage of this departure to try to insert itself in that region. Of course, the talks, let's not give too much credence to those talks. Not much has come out of those talks, and maybe there will be down the road, but the bottom line, I suppose, not much has happened, but then there's not many other talks happening either. So we'll see what happens there. Now, turning to the much bigger issue is, of course, the so-called South Asia policy of the Trump administration. On the whole, on the whole, the policy is okay, in that it does, the Trump administration is very keen to, it believes that there's no military solution to the Afghan problem, and that really the only way to try to eventually find peace for the poor people in Afghanistan is, of course, through talks. And at the same time, Pakistan, the United States has been putting a lot of pressure on Pakistan. But the major flaw in the South Asia policy is the fact that the Trump administration is pushing very hard to have India have a major role in Afghanistan. And that is just unbelievable that they would actually even come up with this idea. Presumably they thought that, well, if we you get India in Afghanistan, India being no friends of Pakistan, that will put pressure on Pakistan and they'll just cave in. Pakistan is not simply a big version of Afghanistan. It's a serious country with nuclear weapons, a big country, lots of people, very educated, the whole thing. And you can't just push around over 200 million people. And so by pushing India to go in Afghanistan is a major, major flaw. And what this means is, of course, the South Asia policy, the way I see it, it's pretty much all sticks, no carrots. And one way I would have thought to try to fix that is to actually have carrots. And two carrots I can think of is, one, increase access of Pakistani goods in the US market. And two, start putting pressure on India about Kashmir. They're getting away literally with blue murder in Pakistan, in Kashmir. And these are issues that are very dear to Pakistan. So if the Trump administration were really serious about trying to fix Afghanistan and have good relations with Pakistan, perhaps they should start looking at these two issues that I just mentioned.
Let's get to the last question and let's summarize. Why is Russia back in Afghanistan?
Well, that's a good question. Effectively, it's to break away from being boxed in Europe. Don't forget, it has European sanctions imposed on Russia, and it needs to get out of there and be able to, just as I said, break away. But the other thing is, by doing this, at the same time, it's thinking, well, we need, the Russians, Putin especially, needs to build ties with the Middle East and South Asia and Central Asia. And this is a great way for them to try to do this. One thing they certainly do not want to do is to leave Central Asia and South Asia to China. And that's why they just want to be there. They also want to make sure that at the end of the day, they have a stake and a say in the final outcome as to what will happen in Afghanistan. And so if they're not there, if they're not at the table, so to speak, they will not have a stake or have a say in the final solution of Afghanistan, if there is one. But of course, the thing to remember as well is, of course, I think Russia is going to have a big job in front of it, because it will have to compete, of course, with China's One Belt, One Road massive project, which covers everything from eastern China all the way to Central Asia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claude Rakisits, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed having this discussion with you.
This was Dr. Claude Rakisits, a professor, a political scientist. He also served as the advisor to the Shadow Federal Minister to Foreign Affairs of Australia and also the advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. We were discussing why is Russia back in Afghanistan. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.